Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
You are very welcome along. It is set to be a big weekend of action in the Heineken Champions Cup. If everything goes ahead as planned, and that might be a big if, we will have the 4 Irish provinces in action over the next few days. At 8 o'clock on Friday night, Castres against Munster gets the weekend up and running from an Irish perspective. Then at 3:15 on Saturday, it's Connacht against Leicester. Leinster take on Montpellier at 1 o'clock on Sunday, and then it's Northampton against Ulster at 3:15 on Sunday. Happy to say Brian O'Driscoll is with us. How are you getting on, Brian?
Hey there, Eoin. How are you?
Yeah, very well. I guess the one place to start is with Munster and with Johan van Graan. The noise really hasn't gone away, despite the fact that we've known for quite some time that he is moving to Bath. It seems to have really ratcheted up over the last 10 days or so. Many questions about Van Graan's commitment to the cause between now and the end of the season, and then Van Graan maintaining that commitment question is not a question at all, that he is fully committed to Munster. Is there a way that Munster managed to step away from the noise, do you think, between now and the end of the season?
I guess it's really dependent on the results, isn't it? On how they go, on how they perform. Winning masks all cracks, and if they can go on a sequence of wins, I think people will forget what's gone on the last few weeks. I think the timing of it, obviously with the substandard performance, very disappointing performance against Connacht after a kind of limped victory against Castres in the week that it was announced that he was going to be leaving, and then subsequently going to Bath. It's inevitable, and I guess there's a human instinct part. People will think, it's about professionalism. You can't help but, let the effects of a decision like that impact you in some shape or form. And, they probably were at a bit of a low ebb, the disappointment that ultimately their coach was leaving them, having signed a contract in the summer to say he was going to stay on. There's almost, I'm not necessarily saying there's a mourning period, because I don't know if they're actually devastated that he's going, because it felt like we were in a bit of a limbo as to whether they wanted him or not. But when someone decides that they want to leave you rather than you wanting to get rid of them, it has an impact. It's like the girlfriend that breaks off with you versus you doing it to her. It's always a bit more hurtful when you're the one on the receiving end. So, he's taken a bit of a beating the last while. And I think part of the problem with particularly his interview with Murray Kinsella on Saturday before the game, he's never really shown much of himself. He's never really shown much emotion. And you think about the emotion is everything in this game. Emotion is everything to the people down in Munster. So if a coach comes on and is pretty benign with, his comments, whether you win, lose or draw, it's very hard to really get motivated behind that. And he talks about, you don't know me, personality wise. No, we don't. And I think if you counter that with someone that I think has had big success, even though some of the results have been pretty mixed, in Andy Friend, you talk about, you get emotion from him. You get tweets from him. And unless a modern day coach, wouldn't be for everyone. But it's not just when things are going well. It's like, disappointed with this performance. It shows that there's actually hurt there or there's joy there. Whereas with Van Graan, it's always felt as though it's kind of, there's nearly a flat line on emotion. And it's very hard to subscribe to that, to get anything from a coach like that of going, has he got a vested interest in this or not? Or is he just there for a paycheck and doing a gig and checking in and checking out? So I can understand the frustrations of the supporters, because that's not a new aspect to his coaching. He's been like that for 4 years, and it's now, if they don't turn the performances around and the results around, I think the question as to whether he will stay on till the end of the season will remain.
Do you think that maybe Munster fans could gain some heart from the fact that Munster fought back pretty well with 14 men last week? We can get into the style of play in just a moment, but in terms of the fight and the appetite, that hasn't been under any question really over the last little while from this Munster team. Is that in any way an indicator that Van Graan privately, because your point is definitely true when it comes to his public appearances, but privately there is that sort of red heart of Munster beating there, that the players can all appreciate that, and that is being replicated in at least the efforts of the team?
Very likely. I think he does seem like a popular guy. I don't know, I think there's, you hear mixed reports from inside and outside of camp as to what, standard of coaching, coach he's perceived to be. But I think from a popularity perspective, I think he's considered to be quite a nice guy. And so, I guess it's more difficult to hate someone that you get on quite well with. But I guess I'd feel frustrated for them because none of us knew about this extended contract, until it was reversed. And no matter who you are, and we've been in a similar situation with Leinster in 2005, and it was even worse than that, where Declan Kidney left us to go back to Munster, and we had to cut. We had to cut him and bring in a replacement, someone to kind of hold the reins for the 3 or 4 month period of towards the end of the season, because when he's going to one of your adversaries, you just can't. There's the element of trust is completely broken, and I think there's an element of that with Van Graan. It's the relationship is a bit broken, and he talks about being totally committed to the Munster cause for the remainder of the season. I don't know how he can actually be 100% committed. Are you saying that he's not in communication with Stuart Hooper and Bruce Craig over in Bath around the recruitment of new players as to how they're going to do things? Because a big part of coaching isn't just coaching the season you're involved in. It's future-proofing other years. And when he's looking at a 3-year contract that he signed over in Bath, he's got to hit the ground running as well. Now, he's going into a good situation over there because they're playing absolute muck this year, and they've won their first game of 11 or 12 last weekend, scraping by with a penalty, against the other worst team in the league. So it does feel as though he's trying to tell everyone that he's fully committed. He might be fully committed when he's in Munster camp, but you can be sure when he's at home, he's having conversations around his new gig, because that's ultimately going to be a major priority of his over this kind of 4 or 5 month period of making sure that his new bosses are happy and that they are in a position where they can grow immediately upon his arrival.
How much of a season was remaining after Declan Kidney told you that he was going back to Munster?
I think about 2.5 or 3 months. So
right.
It wasn't the end of the year. I think a lot of it might have even been less. I think we might have been knocked out of Europe by Leicester in the quarterfinal. We'd won all 6 pool matches, and then we got thrashed by Leicester in Lansdowne Road. And then it was Jerry Murphy came in and took over for the period of time. And it was the right decision. You can't have someone, even from that recruitment point of view, you can't have someone, staying on that's going to be recruiting for one team when he's going to be pitting himself against that team later on. There's zero trust there. How do you know, and I'm not saying this about Declan, but how do you know that the coach isn't going to recruit, which might favour his new team in the following couple of seasons? So we had to, he had to be moved aside and removed from the post, and he went down, and he had big success with Munster. So I'm sure he doesn't regret that decision in any shape or form. But that was a pretty dark time for us. We'd gone through 3 coaches in 3 years at that stage, and Michael Cheika was just about to come in, and thankfully there was an uplift from there. So it's a tricky one, because is Graham Rowntree going to be the guy that's going to get the head position? Obviously, he hasn't wanted to put his hand up, because if he's overlooked for us, then what position of power does it put him in? So I get why he's being coy about staying on, but you can be sure that it's time for him to be a head coach now. He's done an awful lot of assistant coaching jobs and quite a lot of success. I've been coached by him, albeit as a forwards coach in the Lions Tour. He's a very popular guy, really nice guy. very good, intense at training, hardworking. So he's got all the qualities. I guess the big thing is, can he pull it all together and be the top guy and delegate to other people and trust other people to do their roles? And it's a very different prospect of trying to captain the ship rather than be one of the sailors.
Would it help the players if Rowntree's future was cleared up in terms of the specific role that he's going to fulfil sooner rather than later? Because there's been some comparisons made between this situation and even Joe Schmidt in 2019, that the Ireland players knew that Joe Schmidt was gone, Andy Farrell was stepping up, and while they'll say, Jesus, no, it was a World Cup, there was no complacency whatsoever, there's still the suggestion out there that maybe in the subconscious of these players the departing head coach did have a factor in 19.
Yeah, well, what I would say about that is, if you know that the coach that's staying is likely to get the main job, there's no doubt that it's going to heighten performances for the remainder of this season, where you've got the guy that you have to impress still involved in the environment. Now, the fact that I think it's a smart piece of business, irrespective of who may come in above him or with him, to sign him up as soon as they possibly can. He's bedded in very well there. The family's obviously well settled, and I think you do need some continuity when you lose the head coach, you lose the attack coach. You've got to have some level of continuity. I just am unsure as to whether they're earmarking a big overseas name. I don't know. Is a Prendergast ready for their role? I don't know if they feel he's quite ready to step in where Graan and Larkham have gone. So I think they're probably mulling it over in their own heads, trying to buy themselves some time as to come to a decision whether they're up to taking a risk on Rowntree, or whether they need to get a bigger name in there who's tried and tested.
It's interesting because you mentioned the contract there as well, that there was a sense that Munster were content enough to continue with the Van Graan experiment. And I think it actually kind of plays into what you're saying about maybe Van Graan, the public persona, that it's kind of unspectacular, that people were maybe sitting on the fence quite a bit about whether or not Van Graan was a good coach or a bad coach, how interesting he is as a man, or how giving he was maybe in his dealings. It just all felt very vanilla, I guess, over the last little while, and perhaps paints a picture of...
Over 4 years, Eoin. Over 4 years. There's been very little emotion from him at any point. And I understand that that's his personality type, but that's fine when things are going relatively well. But it's an expectant club. It's a club that feels as though it should be getting to finals, winning trophies year on year, and they haven't. They've underachieved. They've gone to semi-finals perennially for the last number of years. And when they do fall short, I'm not saying he's an excuse maker, but it doesn't feel as though he's aching like I think the supporters are, or that the players are. And I'm not saying that he doesn't, but it doesn't come across well. And you need that from your coach. We go back. I know Alex Ferguson had Kevin Keegan in his pocket when I will love it if we beat them. But how much must those Newcastle United supporters have loved their coach in that moment? Because he was pouring his heart out. That's what fans want. That's what supporters want. They want to see that raw emotion from their coach, that they're feeling, that they feel as though, okay, our coach is giving everything he possibly can to this situation, and when we fail, he's dying with us. And I just don't think you get that from Van Graan. And as a result, I think the sympathy when a decision like this happens, and he's choosing it for family reasons or monetary reasons, whatever, I think there's very little sympathy that goes with someone when it doesn't feel as though maybe they've been played all in for the 4 or 5 years that they've been here.
What's happened as well now, Brian, is that because of this news, everything is focused on Johan Van Graan. And in spite of that, I guess the performance against Connacht was so poor, they didn't really land a shot on Connacht, and they weren't great against Ulster. Granted, it was a brilliant, I guess, fight back with 14 men to win in the way that they did. But in terms of the style of play and what they actually brought to proceedings in the last couple of games, and of course against Cash, it has been disappointing. But there are other people that can have fingers pointed at them here as well. The players, Stephen Larkham as well, seems to his importance seems to have faded into the background a little bit since he's announced that he's leaving at the end of the season as well. So where do you look to when you analyse those last 3 performances in particular?
Well, the book does stop with the head coach, doesn't it? And ultimately, that you're in the big position, the best paid position, because it rests on your shoulders. The success you enjoy, the disappointments you have to take that burden, and that's what you do as a head coach. That's why there's lots of people that are happy to be assistant coaches, because they'll take lower salaries, but there's less pressure that comes with it, and some people react personality wise to that position better than they do a head coach role. But I do think that there's got to be questions posed to Larkham. Their attack shape at the start of the year, I thought, began pretty well. They looked as though they were trying to push the pass a little bit more, but now they've reverted back to one-out runners, trying to play the attritional game that maybe the personnel doesn't allow properly. You might be okay in the URC with that, but when you come up against the best teams, the quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals of Europe, against the more powerful French teams and the better English teams, that won't be enough. You've got to think your way around creating space for yourself, and it just feels as though the steps forward they took in the early part of the season, they've absolutely regressed, and it's been very easy for defensive sides, well-organised defensive teams, to be able to analyse them and counter the punches that have been thrown at them. So I think it feels very frustrating. Stephen Larkham shouldn't go unscathed from all of this, because he does an awful lot of the on-field coaching, my understanding is. So if they're struggling to put continuity of phases together and play a style that's breaking teams down, well, the book stops with Van Graan, but it definitely stops with him too.
What we're probably going to see on this weekend on Friday night is Jack Crowley starting, which will probably be his biggest start in the Munster shirt. Granted, we need to see the final team sheet, but he is set to start, according to reports, today. I guess what we've had over the last few months is this conversation about what Ireland should be doing with their number 10s. Should Crowley have gone abroad last year to actually get those minutes? As things have turned out, he's going to get some pretty important reps between last week and this weekend. What have you made of the early signs of Jack Crowley in a Munster shirt?
I'd heard so many positive things about him. He's obviously gone well at Ireland 20s, and the limited occasions that I've seen him, he looks as though he's a talent. There's no doubt, and he's a young guy. You always say it about young guys in their first couple of seasons. I think you've got to give them a little bit of rope. They're going to make errors. They're going to make mistakes. The space is considerably reduced on what they're used to. So there's a bedding in period. But this will be a massive test for him. He looks pretty silky. He looks like he's got nice footwork, good passing game. I guess the important thing is just doing simple things very well this weekend. He made a couple of errors last weekend, one or two, knock-ons, and lost the ball in contact. Just those sort of things. You as a controlling player within any environment, you've got to have a very, very low error count, and facilitate others, more experienced players around you, to bring the big game. He's going to have Dialende back. I think Farrell, is playing his way back into a little bit of form now as well, and he's going to have some of his back three. So I guess it's all to do with the platform that he's given by his pack, which will be difficult over in Cass. They don't lose very often at home. Big marauding pack. We saw what they were capable of in Thomond Park. They kind of negate your attacking abilities. They slow the game down. And it's, I played in the pitch over in Cast at this time of the year. It's not, it's not the high veld. So they're going to have to, roll their sleeves up and get down and dirty. And it's just going to be a control game. It's about not trying to overplay your hand, kicking well, doing the basics extremely well. So I guess from his perspective, it's not trying to be a magician. It's not trying to do something, for people to hang their hat on. I suppose you could draw the comparison. The previous week against Connacht, what's his name at 10, Healy.
Ben Healy.
Tried a 58-meter drop goal, right? So I think for me, what did that say? That said, I'm trying to be the guy that has the rocket launcher of a right boot. And I'm not trying to knock a guy, because if it's a shot to nothing from 40 out and you goes into the in-goal area, you might get possession back. But when you are 30 yards short of it, I just think, what message is that sending to the rest of your team? It's a bit, it's like you're trying to be something that you don't have to be. The 10 in Munster needs to be the controlling influence. You've got lots of good players around you. You've got one of the best centres in the world playing at 12. You've got, Conor Murray or Craig Casey, who I continue to be excited by inside you. So you have to just be that facilitator for other players perform, and you grow into your performance rather than need to be the X factor yourself. That's not their role right now. Their role is to be able to go and allow all 14 players around them to deliver their best and just be the guy, almost like the referee that doesn't stand out. That's what the 10 needs to be. It doesn't need to be a standing figure. Kick your goals, make minimal errors, make the odd break, perhaps pass well, and that's what will give them the platform to play well in cast.
Except potentially there's maybe a lack of security around your immediate future, and you're thinking to yourself, I need to show off here to be Joey Carberry's number 2 next season.
Showing off's not going to help his cause. It's really not, because they're not looking for, like, Johnny Sexton was never, even when he broke through, it was never the standout performer. It wasn't like he had kind of majestic footwork or did any one thing brilliantly well. He's a very good passer of the ball, but it was about bringing his forwards and backs together. And that's what the role of a 10 is, first and foremost. You think about the magical 10s, like, Quade Cooper, right, is very, very skillful player, but look at the career that he's had versus the talent that we saw early on. Sometimes you want the guy that, the straight shooter. Mornay Stain, perfect example, right? He's had a phenomenal career, but you look at the talent of Quade Cooper versus a Mornay Stain. Mornay kicked extremely well, kept his team going forward, played to the game plan, made his tackles, passed when he had to, hardly ever, didn't make too many breaks, but yet he's been lauded and done great things at key moments. That's what you need to do as a 10, in any jersey, but particularly that Munster jersey at the moment. You're not trying to be anything other than a conduit between your forwards and your backs to be able to allow them to play the game plan that has been designed for them, and to put that into effect. And if you can have a magical moment or a break or two or a nice offload over the course of that game, that will enhance that baseline foundation performance.
You are listening to Brian O'Driscoll here with us on Off the Ball. Rugby and Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, official sponsor of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in. Now, at 3:15 on Saturday, Connacht are at home to Leicester. Obviously lost out narrowly in the return leg a few weeks ago. You're going to be covering this one for BT, Brian, and I guess if they win at the weekend, they'll be on the precipice of qualification, which would just be a huge milestone in the progression of the province in general, let alone this team.
Well, they've been the ones that have said, this is our target this year. We want to qualify for the knockout stages. They've not done it before. And I think that it was a realistic target for them. It was always going to be difficult against Leicester and Stade, particularly the way Leicester has started this year. But, I must say I questioned what they were going to be able to do over in Welford Road. And boy, did they respond. They're very well drilled in defence. I think they've got some of their key performers playing very, very well. It feels like we're talking about Jack Carty an awful lot. And then if you look at the other 10s in the Ireland setup, we haven't seen Johnny Sexton since November. The Byrne brothers haven't played since November themselves, I don't think. You've got Carberry injured. So maybe that's why we're talking about Carty, but also the fact that he's, their co-captain. He's had a couple of really big performances. He's played well against Stade. He played well against Leicester. He knocked over the drop goal to keep, to get them the losing bonus point. So he's doing all the things that are being asked of him to get back in the international reckoning. But it feels as though watching the Munster performance, they're a well-coached team. They're trying to push the pass a little bit more. They realise that they can't muscle up against the best team, so they've got to think their way around it. A bit like the Pat Lam team of a few years ago. But now they're discovering their own way and kind of slight nuances of where they've been in the last couple of years. Their launch plays are really good. Mac Hansen, they've got a try scorer in him. Cian Prendergast is playing really great rugby. Having watched the circuitous route to getting to playing top professional rugby. So I think that they're starting to have guys really step up and put their hand up for international selection. Conor Oliver, another one. So they're an exciting team to watch. I think if you counter what we've seen from Munster the last few weeks, on the flip side, Connacht are a good team to watch. They're exciting. They're trying to play, and they're making the most of their resources. There's no doubt they don't have the best players in the provinces at home. No doubt that the other teams have probably a higher standard of player across the board. But boy, do they make up for that with togetherness and unity and coaching and playing for the jersey.
You'd have to say as well, looking at the season results-wise, I mean, the Leinster result at the start of December, the only one that looks bad across the season, and even in the context of that game, Connacht weren't bad for a huge swathe of that game. Like, the way you're talking there, Brian, about just how good they are in terms of their strike plays, maybe some creativity that they have across the back line as well. The one but that always comes up is just the lack of grunt up front. Like, I mean, should the IRFU be potentially looking at this situation and thinking to themselves, Connacht are literally just one or two forwards away from being real contenders for either the URC or to make getting out of their pool a real expectation consistently in the Champions Cup?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they after 3 or 4 rounds, there was real concerns as to where they were going to be with the URC, and particularly with this new qualification process for Europe. I thought, Connacht are the ones that are going to most likely, miss out on the opportunity of playing, finishing top 8. So all of a sudden, with some of their performances, home and away, that they've kind of turned that around, and they're right back in the better half of their conference. I guess no differently than any of the other problems. It's about attracting the quality of player that you want to be able to deliver for you. The likes of Papiili, looked great on paper, but ultimately hasn't quite turned up for them, and they can't afford that type of player to come over and not impress. Bundy was a phenomenal signing for them, but who else has come over? Mac Hansen's done a great job in the early parts of the season. I think he'll get international honours over the course of the next year if he keeps playing the way he is. But with the loss of Delan now as well, it does feel as though they do need a little bit of grunt, a little bit of size to kind of marry with that academy player that is coming through. In fairness to their academy, it's starting to really show when you look at some of the players breaking through. With Buckley injured, you've had other replacements, Angers coming through as well. You've seen guys there were concerns around taking their opportunity, but they've really stepped up. So if you could put in a good bit of steel with a really high quality international player that's maybe out of the reckoning in the Southern Hemisphere, what they would add from a player point of view, but also enhancing the players at training, giving them intel that they haven't been privy to previously, I think that would absolutely add huge value to this Connacht team. And they've come a long way from walking down on Lansing Road. Was the 2002 when they were to be disbanded? And you think about where they are now. They've maybe in the years after that, they were a little bit of a nuisance to the IRFU. I think the IRFU now has to be looking at them and going, this is a massive opportunity for the development of some of our underage players. They could probably see it as, the kind of people won't love hearing this, but as being a feeder team into some of the other provinces. But if they're able to stand alone on their own and develop players and get players pushing through into the international team, well, 4 provinces delivering quality players is a hell of a lot better than 3, So I think they're doing really well, and I've been super impressed with Andy Friend, the way he's kind of made it about the community again. It feels like they're very accessible to the people in their environment. there's a closer tie into the amateur game over in the West as well, more so than there is in the other provinces. So it just feels as though they're doing all the right things to get the most out of their resources.
And it is clearly a province who have an identity and a head coach who believes in that identity so much. And like, I was kind of surprised at the start of the season when Andy Friend took so much issue with what Jake White said about Connacht and the relationship with Leinster, for example. But it makes perfect sense, really, when you think about the work that has gone in at grassroots level. And I know that Andy Friend name-checked a heap of players like Matt Burke and Quaylen Blade at the time, and Dave Heffern and Jack Carty and Tiernan O'Halloran at the time as well, saying that these guys are homegrown talent from west of the Shannon, as it were. And that is a huge point of pride for this province and shows exactly what they're targeting for further improvements down the line. And maybe my question a few minutes ago about who can they sign to bring in is completely misplaced, because Connacht are looking at it the other way entirely.
Yeah, but I think as well, Owen, you've got to look at it both with both streams. I think you've got to look at homegrown, and that's very important. And then you've got to look at taking the likes of Dowling and Prendergast that aren't wanted by Leinster or other provinces. You're gonna the quality of players that are coming from Leinster's academy, sub-academy, that don't ultimately make it in the Leinster team. You don't have to let your pride get the better of you of not taking some of those players. But also, if you look at the development of what has happened, those players since they've moved across, like Prendergast, I reading last weekend in the Sunday Times, I think Peter O'Reilly did an article with him. He was way down the pecking order. He was on the bench for the Ireland under-20s. He was asked to cross by Eric Elwood into the Connacht Academy. He's taken advantage of a couple of injuries, to perform well last season against Racing, and now he's the number 6 for them. And that's what sport is about seeing an opportunity, and when it's handed to you, you take it, and then you're the guy in possession. I've been super impressed with some of his performances. Dowling, again, has been very good in the second row, not wanted in the provincial setup and elsewhere. So the big question for me, and I don't want to, I guess I want to look back on my comment about it being a feeder. If they don't want to be a feeder, they've got to now hold on to those players from other provinces and make them their own. The last thing you want to do is bring someone across, develop them, and then one of the other provinces gone, oh, he's actually a really good player. He slipped through the net, in our provincial setup and our academy system, but now we wouldn't mind having him back. What they need to do is hold on to that type of player, make them Connacht players. And if they're capable of doing that, with the addition of one or two good quality overseas players that really deliver for them, I think they can absolutely be a force to be reckoned with, potentially challenging for the odd URC, getting to some knockout stages of it, but then also providing Irish internationals. So it can go one or two ways, whereas the last thing you want is players going across there and then doing 2 years, playing really well, and then go back to their home province. You need to make them their own and make them feel wanted and loved. And listen, you weren't wanted there previously. This is your new home. A bit like the likes of Andrew Conway, who's now a true and true Munsterman, whereas he came through the provincial setup in Leinster, couldn't get any game time, and now look at what he's managed to do. Connacht need to do that with the players that they get from other provinces.
This weekend then, Leicester, I guess the preview before the other Connacht game, Connacht against Leicester game, was that Leicester were unbeaten, that they were kind of a little bit untouchable so far this season. That's changed a little bit. They finally lost a game, and also in the return leg now, they are at home. So I presume you're giving them every chance this weekend. Yeah,
I think so. I think a huge component about playing Leicester is how you deal with their kick game. And George Ford didn't play in the first game in Welford Road. He'll be back this weekend. He played last weekend against Wasps. They didn't do a huge amount wrong against Wasps, but indisciplined. That was the one thing I think they'll be working on. Borthwick will have been annoyed about, and Kevin Sinfield will be annoyed about last weekend. It gave away a lot of penalties, and when you got someone like Jimmy Gopperts to keep the scoreboard ticking over, they had 2 yellow cards as well, including Ellis Genge, who finally lost his cool as skipper. He'd been doing a good job of keeping his emotions intact, but Wasps managed to draw it out of him. So I think the big thing is, from a Connacht perspective, is is deal with the kick game extremely well, cover the backfield well. Tiernan O'Halloran's going to be dealing with the spiral bombs from George Ford. And obviously the other big aspect was the scrum again in Welford Road. When Dan Cole came on, when Montoya came on, Genge didn't play in that game at all, but he'll be back this weekend. So can they get some form of parity? Can they not allow it to be their Achilles heel where they'll allow Ford to kick goals, or, even down on their own line as they were a couple of times a few weeks back in Welford Road. Connacht nearly gave away a penalty try once or twice. There was lots of penalty advantage. And then on freebies, on that penalty advantage, Leicester managed to score a couple of tries. They can't have any defensive errors too. Wootton kind of came in and tried to stop the ball a couple of times. It didn't manage to do it. I guess you need so much to go well for you. But I do feel as though if Connacht play well, they'll create chances themselves. They'll have some of their own personnel back that maybe they didn't have over in Welford Road. And I think it'll be a close game. And certainly Borthwick will have a lot more respect for Connacht than perhaps he might have done prior to the first game.
Yeah, for sure. That's a 3:15 kickoff on Saturday. You're also due to cover Leinster versus Montpellier on Sunday. That's a 1 o'clock kickoff, assuming it goes ahead. Just first things first on this one, when you don't play for a month, Brian, how much of a setback is that? How many games does it take you to get up to speed again?
Yeah, well, I think it's slightly different these days. It does feel as though this Leinster outfit have found a way to hitting the ground running. I guess it's the match sharpness, it's the speed and intensity. No matter how much training you do, how many of those difficult Stuart Lancaster Tuesdays you do, it's very hard to reenact the physicality around getting hit, getting up, and the emotion and the adrenaline, dealing with all of that, in the melting pot. So, but that said, you think about the start of seasons for Leinster where they've been pretty good from the off. Might be a little bit ring rusty, but I don't anticipate that to be the case. It's usually just a match fitness piece. So trying to make sure that the game is won kind of in the first 50 or 60 minutes, because inevitably you'll be emptying the bench. The cohesion mightn't quite be the same, with replacements coming on. So I think that will be a big focus, about having a huge 40 minutes from their point of view, and kind of trying to blow Montpellier away. And reading articles about there being a bit of grudge. I don't know whether there's ill feeling as to the attitude around Montpellier the last time round, about how much they wanted the game played or not back in December. So feels as though Leinster are ready to kind of rattle them properly. Would there be bad blood in the dressing room if you were in there? No, I think you got to use whatever emotions gets you right. I can't remember too many situations where I was properly put out. Sometimes if there was an individual that you had a little bit of beef with, I used to look forward to trying to take them on, particularly if they were your opposite number. But with regard to what's gone on previously, I think you leave that at board level, and you just worry about your own performance and think about getting 5 points. The fact that they've missed out on any points in the last game, they're only going to be able to get to a maximum of 15 points. That's their number now, and they're going to have to go and try and get 5 away from home against Bath too. So what does 15 points do for you with regard to home? Home knockout stage, home is it last 16, and then the knock-on effect towards home quarterfinals, semi-finals, and so on. So I think that's their goal. I don't think it's about putting one over on Montpellier. Montpellier aren't going to be featuring in the latter parts of this competition, so it's about just getting the job done for yourself. We had Malcolm O'Kelly with us on OTB AM this week, and he made an interesting point regarding the month layoff for Leinster. He reckons that it is going to set them back by quite a bit, to the point where it could have a knock-on impact on the first few Ireland teams that take to the field in the Six Nations this year. He says that it could pave the way for a greater Munster, Connacht, Ulster tint to Andy Farrell's first few teams. Is that something you can see happening yourself? I think it's just difficult to change a winning formula, irrespective of whether guys have had a lot of game time or not. They'll be well conditioned because they'll have been working hard the last month, even though they haven't played games. So if they get a couple of games, think about players coming back from injury. Usually 1 game or 2 games is enough for them to come back and be back in the international reckoning if they're first choice. So that's going to be the case for this Leinster team. You think about how many of them started in the All Black game, how many of them were involved over the course of the whole November, and the success that they've had. It's going to be very hard for Farrell to go away from those players unless you see magnificent performances from some of the other individuals playing for the other provinces, which is very possible. But I do feel as though, provided Leinster get a couple of games, it'll be the tried and tested for Six Nations, with maybe 1 or 2 other additions sneaking in.
Malcolm is always also making the point that Johnny Sexton, I guess he hasn't played since November at this point. He is essentially in a situation where he is an Ireland-only player at this point. I know he's in contention this week. He's back in the mix, and we'll probably see him in a Leinster shirt before he does line out for Ireland again. That's not the worst position if we're looking at it from an Ireland-only standpoint at the moment for Sexton to be in, is it? To be focusing as much on the country appearance-wise as he is for the province?
Yeah, I cannot see him featuring in the URC very often. Yeah. They have to handpick. He's got to be playing less than 20 games a season, and I think that will happen. He's been primed for playing international. He's being kept for the World Cup. He's not being kept to play. Even you've seen in the last few years him not starting in URC or whatever Pro 14 finals. It's been given to Ross Byrne a couple of times. He is doing a job. I'm sure Andy Farrell has been having a word with Leo and Stuart and say, listen, you've got 3 or 4 very good 10s there. Just mind him, and they will know too that they want to mind him as well. But yet, for the big European games, try and stop him from playing in them. I think Johnny will decide a lot himself as to when he wants to play. I know that might sound strange to people listening, but he has the power now internationally and provincially to be able to go and say, listen, I really would want to play in that game, or I'm feeling great, or listen to me because I know my body. I'm up to playing that one, or I need those games in the build up to playing international. He can go in on the back of no games, but he will be better served from having a bit of game time, even 50 or 60 minutes in these 2 next weekends before he goes on and plays Wales. So it's trying to go in, get the job done, and get him off unscathed, and save him for the biggest days, being Six Nations, and then obviously in time down the road World Cup.
At Sexton's age, does he require a few more weeks to get back to being close to an 80-minute man? Or if you had to predict it now, how many minutes do you think we will see from Sexton against Wales, assuming there's no further injury setbacks? Because I asked that in the context, obviously, of what's happened with Joey Carberry in particular, and the greater opportunities for guys behind him.
Well, I think he's only an 80-minute man if the game's in the balance. I think you will see him playing 60, 65 minutes. If the game feels as though it's won, good reason to take him off. If it's in the balance, it's hard to make a change. If you're behind, it's good to change something up and bring some fresh legs on. And Joey Carberry's a great player to be able to do that. We've seen him close games out at New Zealand, but also we've seen what he's capable of doing, of creating opportunity when maybe previously, it hasn't happened for Johnny. So it's only going to be those very, very tight games in Six Nations, of which there will be plenty, that Johnny will be looking at, or they will expect him to play 80 minutes. So I think you've got to be smart that if you are a couple of scores ahead, why would you leave him on now? It doesn't make sense anymore, particularly when you've got good quality players as understudies.
And speaking of those understudies, if we're saying that this could be something of an audition for the next few weeks, absolutely think that what you're saying about November is true, that Andy Farrell will try and keep it as similar to that, to keep the momentum going. And I know his name has been mentioned so much on the show over the last little while, but just to go back to Connacht again and Jack Carty, if we are talking about understudies and the injury problems at 10, how big a few weeks is it for this guy to come back from his own injury, to hit the ground running and to try and get his way into that Ireland squad?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one, because I really felt as though he hasn't been. He's not been in the reckoning.
Yeah.
And as much as he's had some good performances, I just don't know if he is an Andy Farrell type player. That said, I don't know if we're not going to have Joey Carbery by the sounds of things for the first game against Munster. Harry Byrne hasn't been everything that he's been made out to be with some of his cameo performances. I know they've been few and far between, but even against Argentina, bit of a mixed bag. He has barely played for Leinster. He's had some injuries, so very hard to hang your hat on him as being the next guy. I think Crowley is probably one of the unlucky ones that hasn't been in the reckoning, and I'd be excited to maybe see him a little bit more in national camp. We know what Ross Byrne's capable of doing, so it feels like it's a great opportunity from Jack Carty's point of view. But I know he's trying to banish the memories of Japan, but I just wonder, it feels as though there's still residuals that maybe Farrell's mind is made up a little bit, that this guy isn't the guy for him. And if Sexton gets injured and Carbery's not available come the World Cup in 2 years' time, is he going to be the replacement to get Ireland to a World Cup semi-final or a final or bring them to success?
He's picking Billy Burns in that situation.
Yeah, I think he is. I think he is too. I agree. I think he is picking Billy Burns. There's parts of Carty's game, obviously, that I really like. And sorry, the other thing that I think is worth pointing out, and I was kind of mulling this over, the kicking percentage thing. I think Carty's down at 67 or 68%. I'd love to know what his away kicking percentage is. Because if any player had to go and kick in the sports ground when the gale is blowing, touchline conversions and whatnot, bet you their numbers are going to come down into the 70s. So what are our stats actually like away from home is probably a better, gives you a better understanding as to what sort of place kicking percentage he's achieving. Just there's something about Carty that I just, I don't know. I want to see him attacking the ball a little bit more as a player and staying squarer. I think he's a habit a bit like Carbery of turning his shoulders to where the ball is being passed. And I think you get away with that maybe at URC, maybe even Europe, but at international level, pushing the defence onto the ball carrier there, they're going to get smashed. So I do think that's one area of his game that he absolutely needs to hone. Madigan used to do it as well for Ulster and probably still does it a bit, where as soon as you turn your shoulders, the defence is gone from you. You're not a threat anymore. And they'll move on and get double hits on whoever your target is. So I think that's one area that he needs to improve on. But the rest of his game has been pretty solid. I look back on the Leicester performance again. I wouldn't say it was necessarily Roy of the Rovers stuff. I'm looking for highlights for BT for the game on Saturday, and I watched the first half, and he was solid without being exceptional. Took his try well. Obviously knocked over the drop goal at the end. So he's there for clutch moments, and he's delivering, but for me, there still remains some hang-up. But yet, the alternative right now with Carbery gone, I don't know if it's either the Byrne brothers because of their lack of game time.
Have you seen someone of Carty's age being able to be coached out of those little weaknesses that you see, like the shoulders that you mentioned there? Like, can Simon Easterby have a one-on-one session with him, or a skills coach even, or how does that work? Is it possible to alter that?
Yeah, of course it is. I think one thing that I've discovered, you can be coached anything. I think you watch how some of the players that I played with, towards the end of my career, how they evolved into very different players. Devon Toner's a great example of that. He would never have been a ball player, but then as a first receiver in that pod of being able to tip the ball out inside or pull it out the back, but yet look as though he could carry himself. That was a massive evolution. Adam Byrne become an offloader from a guy when I was playing with him, always died with the ball. So there is totally an evolution through the coaching piece that we've seen at both national and provincial level. So it can be taught. It just needs clarity of the coach to understand that needs to happen. And I think, again, we've been treated with Johnny, and I think Harry Byrne's very good at it as well. He stays square very, very long and then whips the passes. And I think he holds the inside defenders that little bit better than other players. And the knock-on effect is, there mightn't be an appreciation, but I bet you there's an appreciation from the players on his team that by staying square and taking it to the line, you create an opportunity to get inside shoulders, and then the knock-on effect is offloads and people running good lines from you, being able to get your hands free. So it's just a small thing, but it's something that I've watched closely over the last while, and he is just playing a little bit laterally, and maybe that's one aspect that that Andy Farrell has been looking at and thinking you just can't get away with that at international level.
Right, that's very interesting. Just to mention as well, then Northampton against Ulster at 3:15 on Sunday. That's the final of the 4 Irish-related games this weekend in the Heineken Champions Cup. It feels like every time we talk about Ulster at the moment, Brian, is a question of where are Ulster at the moment, what sort of Ulster is going to show up at the weekend, and is it too harsh to be overly critical of losing a game in Thomond Park, or is it reasonable to suggest that a team who were in the lead and get an extra man essentially for the rest of the game, that they should be seeing that game out?
Well, both, to be honest with you. I think there's obviously a huge galvanising effect to any team when they lose a man. I don't know, it changes. You realise that you're gonna have to take that extra 5 or 6% on your own performance to make up for that loss. So I do feel as though there is that factor that Munster managed to turn around and managed to deliver, and through sheer bloody mindedness and intent, and 1 or 2 good offloads in the lead up to the final try. Coombs got a brilliant offload away where lots of players would have died. So there's winning big moments. I think the other thing about Ulster was when they were 13-11 up, they started playing a bit negatively. They started box kicking the ball away a lot. Doak kicked a couple of poor box kicks. Mike Lowry was the only one that really looked as though he wanted to attack with real intent and threat. And it felt as though they tried to defend that, not lose it, rather than go out and win and get the next score. And I think that mindset is so important in victory, that when you're trying to see a game out, inevitably you let the other team in some capacity, or when you play less positively, and it's not even playing negatively, but less positively, you open the door to the opposition going and being a threat at you. And so it just shows the mentality around playing to win and score rather than playing to not concede.
How do you change that attitude if you're one of those players, and it feels like that's sort of a little bit ingrained, that attitude shift in that second half?
I think it's a bit of leadership, to be honest with you. I think, in pivotal positions, people taking the bull by the horns, I think obviously Doak is a young guy, but be it, a captain in there or, a leader, you have to remember as well, it's a pretty young Ulster team. A lot of them are starting to make names for themselves. But it does feel as though, a Vermeulen or someone needed to step up. And I know he's new to the squad, but, to step up and go, right, this is what we need to do. Let's play against Munster. Let's take them through some phases. Let's force them into making mistakes. We can kick to the corner. We can build on our maul. Let's try and look at how we build our next score, rather than thinking, we're in possession. Let's play territory. Let's play down there and let's back our defence. Because, with good offloads like Coombs is one, that's the difference. Sometimes getting your hands free in behind, get in behind the defensive line, and then 3 or 4 phases later, they're getting in. So I just think it's an experience piece, and they'll be better for their loss, but it's kind of a bit of a bitter pill to swallow, because they were in a great position to go and have their first win there in 7 or 8 years, and they really let it slip, and they'd be kicking themselves.
We were talking earlier about Connacht and their kind of potential breakthrough moment that could be coming down the tracks, or how to get to that next level. It does feel that Ulster have been tipping along at a similar level for quite some time. Like, even if we go back a couple of seasons to Stockdale's drop ball at the Aviva Stadium, and obviously then if we go back through the last 10 years and getting to a Heineken Cup final, it feels that they've been able to hit a level inconsistently, but the level has been relatively high. Is it just that consistency piece, which is the not the final piece of the jigsaw, but is the part that will kick Ulster onto that next level?
Yeah, I think if you look at that team 10 years ago, I think that was a very good Ulster team. The one that got to the final, they were getting to Celtic League finals. We beat them in one around 13 or 14, and that was a good team. They were. So I think they just missed out on having a little bit of luck to get some success. It does feel as though this is a building team. You've seen some kind of youthful players breaking through, Hume coming through, Balakoon coming through, Lowry starting to put in some performances. They've always lacked a bit of steel. When they struggle, they've lacked steel up front. And what was great about that team 10 years ago, John Afoa, Rory Best, Johan Muller. I think if you look now at the second row, Alan O'Connor, Carter, Treadwell, I don't think there's anyone that you would be afraid of in that threesome. I know Henderson has been in and out, obviously when he's playing well and delivering for them, but we haven't seen an awful lot of him in an Ulster jersey. And then you look at the front row, it's fine for URC, but Warwick, Herring, very good with his darts, won't let you down. But when you're looking at European style caliber players, world class players, I think they fall short, and that's why they've been almost there, but not quite being able to deliver week on week, is because comparatively to their better team a decade ago, they don't have that same level of quality in some of those grunt positions, laying the platform for what's always been quite a nice backline, but ultimately they haven't been able to deliver for them.
Yeah, and it is away to Northampton this weekend. Just a reminder that at 3:15 on Sunday. Just one last thing to ask you about, Brian, before we wrap up today. News that I think maybe a lot of people would have missed over the course of the Christmas, or just before the Christmas, was that the IRFU have a new CEO in Kevin Potts. It was announced on December 22nd. He took over on January the 1st. And I guess this is a sense of next man up. It's an inside the IRFU appointment. It's a very safe appointment. Is it one that could have been a little bit more ambitious, Brian?
Yeah, I think it could have been. I'll caveat that bit by saying I know Kevin Potts relatively well. Not relatively well. I know him. I like him. I think he's a good guy. He's obviously been chief operating officer for 4 or 5 years now. He's seen what goes on under the bonnet in the IRFU. I guess the only thing is that I knew the other external candidate, and I was very excited when I was in conversation with him a few months ago when he was being suggested as a potential replacement for Philip Brown. Sometimes you need eyes from the outside coming in to not revolutionise, but evolve a setup. And it does feel as though when you promote from within, you can't see, you don't bring any external factors in with you and see where there might be some need for change. It was a pretty unenviable time for him to come in and take over after the letter from the women's team, from those 60 players, past and present. So yeah, I did note that Kevin Potts was pretty quiet over that couple of week period. I know he was only interim at that time, but it does feel, just because I know that other candidate, it really would have been a bold play, and I think he could have really kind of made for great change. Vast experience with venture capital. I saw Philip Brown did an article, pre-Christmas with the Sunday Times business section about how maybe it is time to take on venture capital. Well, you want people that are most experienced with that, and I know Kevin Potts had some dealings with CVC up to this point in with that URC and Six Nations deal, but just when you know the individual that was the alternative and you rate them as highly as I do, I guess you can't help but feel a little bit frustrated that bigger change might have been the next level of progression into where rugby needs to go.
Can you tell us what change are the IRFU missing out on by not appointing the external candidate? Well,
I think if you look at the way the setup is, that the power of the CEO in the IRFU, I don't feel as though has the same level of power in most organisations. It's still very committee driven. It's still, Philip Brown talked about how at times in that article, how at times it's very difficult to have decisions, sometimes difficult to get decisions across the line because of that process. So structurally, you wonder, would someone coming in and changing things up have been a positive for the overall business structure and how decisions could be made? But the reality is as well, and this mightn't be lovely to hear, but a lot of the makeup of the committees is from people doing 20-year service with their clubs and then getting elevated to their provincial setup and then to the national setup. It's very hard for all of those individuals that have put the graft in. If someone new came in and changed those structures, they wouldn't be, and a lot of these are on our voluntary basis, that they're not going to be getting their, potential trips away or, some of the upsides to that involvement. So I understand why they mightn't want to, shake the boat. Shake the boat, the right term? No?
Rock the boat. Rattle a few cages.
Thank you. Rattle a few cages.
Either works.
One or both of those. So, because, it obviously isn't kind of beneficial from their perspective. I get that too, but it does feel as though it's not dealt with on my understanding of the union is not dealt with on a business as per other businesses are function and how they're seen from a profit and loss making perspective.
Well, it's human nature, isn't it, to kind of look after your own position? Like, how much, like, is this a missed opportunity, I guess, from the IRFU to not? But I'm about to say rattle their own cage here a little bit. But like, what organisation does take that decision voluntarily?
Well, I think there was a big decision down in Australia a few years ago to change the organisation makeup, and obviously, they've hit some tough times with rugby down there and the success of it. You think about back to the 90s and how good that Australian team was. It kind of has flattered to deceive since the World Cup in 2003, even though they got to the World Cup final in 2015 under Michael Cheika. But I do feel as though it's a possible missed opportunity, because when, like I said, when you employ from within, and Kevin Potts is he with the IRFU for the guts of 15 years? I'm not sure exactly how long he's been there, but it's very hard to feel a freshness in your environment when you do employ from within. And you think about now how often executives, CEOs jump from one firm to another, but are able to bring new concept, freshness, new thoughts and ideas, and just an understanding of how someone did something successfully in another way and bring it into your environment. When you employ from within, I guess you don't get any of that.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this comes through over the next few months. As you mentioned there, the letter signed by the 60 past and present women is a huge topic that's not going to go away, and I presume that'll be top of the agenda for Kevin Potts and the IRFU over the next little while. Plus, on top of that, then the post-pandemic financial aspect. So a massive year to be stepping into Philip Brown's shoes for sure there from Kevin Potts. Just a reminder, plenty of rugby coverage coming up this weekend on OTB Sports. We're going to have Aisling O'Reilly reporting from Connacht against Leicester Tigers. It's at the Sports Ground at 3:15 throughout OTB Saturday. And then on Sunday, we've got live commentary of Leinster against Montpellier. Conor Morris and Andy Dunn will be watching that one. Brian O'Driscoll, great stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers,
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.